Alhamdulillah. Amen. Those that are online, we are going to read from what we normally do in this handout that will be shared in just a moment. Al-Khulasa, and the heading will be Invocations After the Dawn Prayer. There's a hardbound version for those that are present physically, and the softbound will begin on 133 in Arabic and 134 in transliteration. I think the hardbound one is one page after that. بسم الله
الرحمن الرحيم. ألف لام ميم. ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون أولئك على هدى من ربهم وأولئك هم المفلحون وإلهكم إله واحد لا إله إلا هو الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أقدم إليك بين يدي كل نفس ولمحة ولحظة وخطرة وطرفة يطفو بها أهل السماوات والأرض وكل شيء هو في علمك كائن وقد كان. أقدم إليك بين يدي ذلك كله الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض من ذا الذي يشاء عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء.
وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يؤوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم. لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وإن تبدوا ما في أنفسكم أو تخفوه يحاسبكم به الله فيغفر لمن يشاء ويعذب من يشاء والله على كل شيء قدير. آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون كلنا آمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله وقالوا سمعنا وأطعنا غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها
ما اكتسبت. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا نسينا أو أخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين.
آمين.
شاهد الله أنه لا إله إلا هو والملائكة أولو العلم قائما بالقسط لا إله إلا هو العزيز الحكيم.
وأنا أشهد بما شهد الله به
وأشهد الله على ذلك وأستودع الله هذه الشهادة
وهي اللي عند الله وديعة
أسأله حفظها حتى يتوفاني عليها. إن الدين عند الله الإسلام.
قل اللهم مالك الملك اللهم مالك الملك تؤتي الملك من تشاء وتنزع الملك ممن تشاء
وتعز من تشاء وتذل من تشاء بيدك الخير إنك على كل شيء قدير. تولج الليل في النهار وتولج النهار في الليل وتخرج الحي من الميت وتخرج الميت من الحي وترزق من تشاء بغير حساب. رحمن الدنيا والآخرة ورحمهما تعطي من تشاء منهما وتمنع من تشاء. أنت ترحمنا فارحمنا رحمة تغنينا بها عن رحمة من سواك. اللهم اقض عنا الدين واغننا من الفقر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم
لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب
أحد الله الصمد
لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
قل أعوذ برب الفلق
من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس
إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. The next word is the word of Sayyidina al-Shaykh Abu Bakr bin Salim, and it is in the digital khulasa that we've shared and are sharing again on page 145 for the Arabic, 146 for the transliteration and translation. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم يا عظيم السلطان يا قديم الإحسان
يا دائم النعم يا كثير الجود يا واسع العطاء يا خفي اللطف يا جميل الصنع يا حليم لا يعجل صل يا ربي على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم وارض عن الصحابة أجمعين. اللهم لك الحمد شكرا ولك المن فضلا وأنت ربنا حقا ونحن عبيدك رقا وأنت لم تزل لذلك أهلا. يا ميسر كل عسير ويا جابر كل كسير ويا صاحب كل فريد ويا مغني كل فقير ويا مقوي كل ضعيف ويا مأمن كل مخبر يسر علينا كل عسير فتيسير العسير عليك يسير. اللهم يا من لا يحتاج إلى البيان والتفسير حاجاتنا كثير وأنت عالم بها وخبير. اللهم إني أخاف منك وأخاف ممن يخاف منك وأخاف ممن لا يخاف منك. اللهم بحق من يخاف منك نجينا ممن لا يخاف منك. اللهم بحق سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم احسنا بعينك التي لا تنام واكنفنا بكنفك الذي لا يرام وارحمنا بقدرتك علينا فلا نهلك وانت ثقتنا ورجاؤنا. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. اللهم إنا نسألك زيادة في الدين وبركة في العمر وصحة في الجسد وسعة في الرزق وتوبة قبل الموت وشهادة عند الموت ومغفرة بعد الموت حساب وأمانة من العذاب ونصيبا من الجنة وارزقنا النظر إلى وجهك الكريم. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته.
آمين.
فاتحة.
The next word is the word Al-Latif of Imam Haddad, page 151 or 2. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. خلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون. ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون. ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون. أفحسبتم أنما خلقناكم عبثا وأنكم إلينا لا ترجعون. تعالى الله الملك الحق لا إله إلا هو رب العرش الكريم. ومن يدع مع الله إلها آخر لا برهان له به فإنما حسابه عند ربه إنه لا يفلح الكافرون. وقل رب اغفر وارحم وأنت خير الراحمين. فسبحان الله حين تمسون وحين تصبحون وله الحمد في السماوات والأرض وعشيا وحين تظهرون. يخرج الحي من الميت ويخرج الميت من الحي وبعد موتها وكذلك تخرجون. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله. الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون. والله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم. والله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر. سبحان الله عما يشركون. والله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. سلام على نوح في العالمين إنا كذلك نجزي المحسنين إنه من عبادنا المؤمنين. أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق. أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق. أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق. بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم. بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم. بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم. اللهم إني أصبحت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فأتم نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إني أصبحت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فأتم نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إني أصبحت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك وأشهد ملائكة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك وأشهد ملائكة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك وأشهد ملائكة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك وأشهد ملائكة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافي مزيدا. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافي مزيدا. لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافي مزيدا. آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بالجبت والطاغوت واستمسكت بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم. آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بالجبت والطاغوت واستمسكت بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم. آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بالجبت والطاغوت لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم. رضيت بالله ربا بالإسلام دينا وسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا. رضيت بالله ربا بالإسلام دينا وسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا. رضيت بالله ربا بالإسلام دينا وسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلته رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلته رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلته رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلته رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلته رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت هو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت هو رب العرش العظيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. وصلي على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل 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 على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم إني أسألك من فجاءة الخير وأعوذ بك من فجاءة الشر. اللهم أنت ربي لا إله إلا أنت خلقتني وأنا عبدك وأنا على عهدك ووعدك ما استطعت. أعوذ بك من شر ما صنعت. أبوء لك بنعمتك علي وأبوء بذنبي فاغفر لي فإنه لا يغفر الذنوب إلا أنت. اللهم أنت ربي لا إله إلا أنت عليك توكلت وأنت رب العرش العظيم. ما شاء الله كان وما لم يشأ لم يكن ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. أعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير وأن الله قد أحاط بكل شيء علما. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من شر نفسي ومن شر كل دابة أنت آخذ من ناصيتها إن ربي على صراط مستقيم. برحمتك أستغيث من عذابك أستجير. أصلح لي شأني كله ولا تكلني ولا إلى أحد من خلقك طرفة عين. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من الهم والحزن وأعوذ بك من العجز والكسل وأعوذ بك من الجبن والبخل وأعوذ بك من غلبة الدين وقهر الرجال. اللهم إني أسألك العافية في الدنيا والآخرة والعافية المعافاة الدائمة في ديني ودنياي وأهلي ومالي. اللهم استر عوراتي وأمن رعاتي. اللهم احفظني من بين يدي ومن خلفي وعن يميني وعن شمالي ومن فوقي وأعوذ بعظمتك أن أغتال من تحتي. اللهم أنت خلقتني وأنت تهديني وأنت تطعمني وأنت تسقيني وأنت تميتني وأنت تحييني وأنت على كل شيء قدير. أصبحنا على فطرة الإسلام وعلى كلمة الإخلاص وعلى دين نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وعلى ملة أبينا إبراهيم حنيفا مسلما وما كان من المشركين. اللهم بك أصبحنا وبك أمسينا وبك نحيا وبك نموت وعليك نتوكل وإليك النشور. أصبحنا وأصبح الملك لله والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم إني أسألك خير هذا اليوم ونوره وبركته وهداه. اللهم إني أسألك خير هذا اليوم وخير ما فيه وخير ما قبله وخير ما بعده وأعوذ بك من شر هذا اليوم وشر ما فيه وشر ما قبله وشر ما بعده. اللهم ما أصبح بي من نعمة أو بأحد من خلقك فمنك وحدك لا شريك لك فلك الحمد لك الشكر على ذلك. سبحان الله وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه من ذلك كلماته. عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه من ذلك كلماته. سبحان الله وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه من ذلك كلماته. سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه من ذلك كلماته. سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد وزنة عرشه من ذلك كلماته. سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه من ذلك كلماته. سبحان الله عدد ما خلق في السماء. سبحان الله عدد ما خلق في الأرض. سبحان الله عدد ما بين ذلك. سبحان الله عدد ما هو خالق. الحمد لله عدد ما خلق في السماء. الحمد لله عدد ما خلق في الأرض. الحمد لله عدد ما بين ذلك. الحمد لله عدد ما هو خالق. لا إله إلا الله عدد ما خلق في السماء. لا إله إلا الله عدد ما خلق في الأرض. لا إله إلا الله عدد ما بين ذلك. لا إله إلا الله عدد ما هو خلق في السماء. الله أكبر عدد ما خلق في الأرض. الله أكبر عدد ما بين ذلك. الله أكبر عدد ما هو خالق. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما خلق في السماء. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما خلق في الأرض. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما بين ذلك. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما هو خالق. لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عدد ما في علم الله. وصلاة والسلام دائمين بدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عدد ما في علم الله. صلاة والسلام دائمين بدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله. صلاة وسلام دائمين بدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة في كل لحظة أبدا عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه من ذلك كلماته.
وإذا حضرة النبي اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى الفاتحة. Inshallah, this morning you all will be continuing, and inshallah, over this weekend, completing with Allah's aid, Ad-Dawa At-Tamma, the complete summons by Imam Abdullah Al-Haddad, which is a fundamental book in fiqh ad-dawah, in understanding, inviting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we know is one of the three objectives, the three aims that Dar Mustafa was established on, and that Dar Rahma was endowed on by the founder of Dar Mustafa. And alhamdulillah, Sayyid Uzair took this book and other books of Imam Haddad, as well as the Awrad, for example, that we just read, the Word of Latif by the author, Imam Haddad, or the Ratib, or what have you. He took it from the Shuyukh of Dar Mustafa, alhamdulillah, whose chains go directly to that Imam in the city of his birth. Alhamdulillah, the tradition he represented and was the reviver of, and was the axis of dawah of, and guidance. Qutb dawah, what irshad. So inshallah ta'ala, benefit. And you know, when you read a book, or even studying hadith or Quran, one should expand one's perspective of what is happening, which can be called mashhad, or what you're witnessing. And for example, if you're reading a book from Imam Haddad, one shouldn't just see the teacher one's taking it from, but one should see the chain that it's attached to. And then hopefully receive it like one's receiving it from the author. And receive it like one is receiving the irth, the inheritance from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the author is delivering. And inshallah ta'ala, with that, one benefits more. And then also always have adab in your learning, pay attention, don't be on devices, and have ikhlas, which is from the most fundamental of adab. Do it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah yabarak fikum, inshallah, may take advantage, inshallah, subhanakallah, inshallah.
You guys have the book? The translation?
Yeah.
He's getting it.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi sallam. Wa radiyallahu ankum. Ignorance for the ignorant is a death before death. His body is a tomb long before he is led in his tomb. Ignorance nowadays prevails, has taken control of the people of these evil times and is leading them into strange places, to the extent that majority of them know nothing of what the truth of religion is, neither of the hereafter nor of returning to God. This has become a major catastrophe, the harm of which affects both the ignorant and the learned, the common people and the elect. As for the harm that affects the ignorant, it is obvious, for he has lost that which God has made incumbent upon him in the way of learning about his religion and his injunctions. As for the harm that befalls the scholar, it is because of his failing to call to the path of God and to teach the people what they need to know of the religion, while able to. Thus, when the ignoramus no longer know that they are obliged to seek that which God has made obligatory upon them, a religious knowledge, it becomes incumbent upon the scholars to bring this to their attention. Their keeping silent at such times is forbidden, and God will accept no excuse from them for not taking the attentive with the ignorant.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله تعالى سيدنا محمد أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه الدين. لو تعلم من تعلم تذكر تذكرون في الانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحافظة المسبوطة بلا سنة والسنة والسلام والدعاء على الهدى والدلالة على الغيب وقائمة جناه ومرضات القلب والثواب اسمه تعالى. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله ولا قوة إلا بالله عدد كلام كتب أبد العابدين من دهن دهن سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وحسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ولا قوة إلا بالله. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من ذنب وزن وعدم الظلم أو أجهل وجل علي. اللهم اغفر لنا من زين بالحلم وأكرم بالتقوى وجملنا بالعافية يا رحمن الرحيم يا رب الرحمن. طيب, so the author is picking up where we left off, where he's talking about the harms of ignorance and how it's become prevalent in the ummah, in this time. So he wrote this book several hundred years ago, and he's talking about how bad the prevalence of ignorance is in the ummah in his time and how dangerous it is. And now, hundreds of years after he's written the book, it's almost like we feel like he's speaking about our time and era, in our circumstance with the ummah. And ignorance has only really increased since his time. What with the spread of things that distract people from the message of Allah Ta'ala, things that distract them from learning, things that the lessening of the seekers of knowledge and the scholars and the callers to Allah Ta'ala, and so ignorance has increased, and people are in more need to learn. So he says, he says, in ignorance there is death. There is death for people before they actually die. He's mentioning a verse of poetry. And he says their bodies are like graves before they're actually in the grave. And so what he means by that is, number one, what he's alluding to is a principle of the people of Tasawwuf, which is that, or conception of them, which is that knowledge is like, it's food and sustenance for your heart. Knowledge is food and sustenance for your heart. The more you learn specifically about things that are beneficial to you, like Islam and how to practice your religion, that is sustenance for your heart. So someone who's ignorant, right, they've essentially starved their heart, and their heart is dead. Okay, and furthermore, the things that revive our hearts, dhikr, obeying Allah Ta'ala, worshiping Him, staying away from the haram, all these things require knowledge to actually practice. So if people don't know, then they're obviously not practicing. So they've prevented their hearts from being sustained through knowledge in and of itself because they're ignorant, and they're also not practicing things that have an effect on reviving their heart and keeping it healthy. So then what happens? Their hearts are dead, and the heart is the spiritual heart, even the physical heart is it's one of the most important, or if not the most important, organ of the body. And if that dies, khalas, then what's left of the body? So for that reason, he says in ignorance, or ignorant people, okay, people who are ignorant of the religion of God, they're dead before they actually die, and their bodies are like graves before they actually put in the grave. And he mentions that in this time and era, so again, when he was writing the book hundreds of years ago, he's saying ignorance has become widespread. Ignorance has become widespread. And because of the ignorance that's become widespread, people don't even know to the Creator, how they have to worship Him, how they have to obey Him, how they have to stay away from that which He has made forbidden. They don't know about the responsibility they have to the rest of creation, how they have to be to their families, their wives, their spouses, their children, their parents, their neighbors, their co-workers, even the animals and plants that we live with in our ecosystem and our environment. People don't know how to act towards creation or the Creator. And they definitely don't know about the next life and what's waiting for them there, depending on how they were in this life. And all this, he says, is a great calamity. It's a massive calamity that affects every single person in the world, whether that person is a scholar or not a scholar, someone who practices or doesn't practice. It doesn't matter. It's going to affect everyone in the entire world, this prevalence of ignorance. How does it affect everyone? Because number one, if you're someone who's ignorant, right, this calamity affects you because you don't know and you're not practicing. You don't know and you're not practicing. Okay? So you're in trouble. You're in trouble because you don't know and you're not practicing. And one day you'll be held to account. And then, some people are excused for their ignorance. For example, someone who just recently became Muslim and hasn't had time to learn. Or for example, someone who was raised, they're born Muslim, but they're raised somewhere very, very distant from scholars. Okay, those types of people are excused in their ignorance to a degree. But for the vast majority of us, even if we are ignorant, we'll be held accountable for our ignorance. Because like we mentioned previously in the book, the Prophet said in Hadith, he said that seeking knowledge is obligatory on every believer and every Muslim. So every believer, even if they don't know, they have to make sure they know. You have to go out of your own way to learn that which Allah Ta'ala has made obligatory upon you. Just like how, for example, people go out of their way to learn about things that would help them in the dunya, right? How to, certain occupations or skills to help them in the dunya. In terms of deen, it's even more so. It's even stronger obligation, and it's even more necessary for our salvation and our well-being in this world and the next. So he's saying that ignorant people are harmed by this calamity that's overwhelmed society, this ignorance, because they don't know and they're not practicing. Then he says people who are scholars or students of knowledge, they're also afflicted by it. Why are they afflicted by it? Because the prevalence of ignorance is basically showing that they have shortcomings in spreading the knowledge of God, in spreading the knowledge of Islam and the Prophet ﷺ. So people who are ignorant, they don't know and they're not practicing. People who know, the scholars and students of knowledge and the call of Allah Ta'ala, this tribulation, calamity that's encompassed society is also bad for them, because it's basically telling them, look, you guys are coming up short. Okay, you guys are coming up short, and you have to go out and teach people. You have to go out and teach people. So the prevalence of ignorance affects everyone. And it's a sign to everyone that, there's a lot of work to be done, either on yourself individually to learn and practice, or if you know and you're practicing, it's a sign too that you have to work harder to spread the message. Tamam? And so long as ignorance is prevailing and persistent, it's obligatory upon scholars, he says, to tell people and teach them about Islam, and to teach them that which they don't know, which they need to know to worship Allah Ta'ala properly. And they have absolutely no excuse, if they have the scholars and the people of knowledge have absolutely no excuse in not doing that. They have no excuse in not doing that. They have to go out and change society and teach people what they need to know. Go ahead, read.
Scholars should pay much more attention to this than to much else they are responsible for. Know that Islam is subject to periods of slacking, and that the people today are in the throes of one of these. For we have reached a state where so many people within the circle of Islam know nothing of what God has made obligatory for them to do or refrain from doing. Furthermore, they do not know that it is obligatory to seek the knowledge and then implement it. What then will move them ever to do that? Why would they ever start learning when they have no idea that it is obligatory? It is therefore incumbent upon the learned who call to God to take the initiative in conveying this obligation to them and exhorting them to fulfill it. For he who knows not will never start learning until informed he must do so. These periods of slacking that beset Islam and occur between one caller to God and another are similar in some ways to those that occur between one divine envoy and another. This has been alluded 2 by the Gnostic Sheikh Abdul Wahib ibn Ahmed al-Shahrani, may God have mercy on him, near the end of the 10th century, at the beginning of his book entitled Warning the Deceived. This is different from the estrangement that is to befall religion near the end of time, at the approaches of the hour, about which the Prophet said, may God's blessings and peace be upon him. Religion began as a stranger and will revert to being a stranger. Therefore, happy are the strangers who perceive of my sunnah that which the people have corrupted. He also said, may God's blessings and peace be upon him. People have entered this religion of God in large groups, and they shall exit in large groups. Some of the people of this time know nothing about truth and religion, neither do they know that it is obligatory to learn about them. Others know that it is obligatory, yet fail to seek the knowledge because of their negligence and complacency, or because they are too engrossed in working for this world to preoccupy with amassing and enjoying it. Others know of the obligation and do seek the knowledge, but never implement what they learn. Others yet learn and practice, but without sincerity, for worldly purposes and ephemeral gains, rather than for the sake of God. These are all astray and subject to deception.
So he says here, he's saying now that the Muslim community, the Ummah, goes through phases. It goes through phases of strong Iman and phases of weaker Iman. And this is natural, even in an individual, right? An individual goes through phases where they might feel strength in their Iman as a result of their increased worship and their increased dhikr, for example, and their increased presence with Allah Ta'ala. And then a person might go through phases where their Iman becomes weaker. They're still Muslim, but weaker Iman, meaning, maybe they've become, they've forgotten or they've become heedless for a little bit, and they have to pick themselves back up with another increase in worship. So there's phases in an individual's life. And so likewise, there are phases in the Ummah. There are phases where the Ummah becomes stronger in Iman and practice, and there are phases where the Ummah becomes weaker in practice and Iman. These phases, the scholars say, are similar to the phases between prophets. So we mentioned earlier in the book when we were talking that, for example, Bani Israel will send prophets. Okay, like for example, Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam was sent with a message, and he was sent with an actual codified, a legal code for Bani Israel to follow, a Sharia. So Bani Israel took this from Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, and they practiced it. And then over time, maybe they began to, their Iman became weaker. Meaning, they might have left a few things, and they needed reminders and strengthening, in their Iman. So Allah would send a prophet to revive that message to Musa alayhi salam amongst them, and they would get picked back up, and they would continue. And another phase of, you can say another valley or another phase of weakness would come, and then he would send another prophet to help them, and they would become very uplifted again, and so on and so forth. And so similarly, these phases in the society, in the community, resemble those phases that happened in Bani Israel and other communities. The difference, however, is that in our Ummah, the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, there's no prophet after Muhammad bin Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, there's no prophet after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And to these phases that come and afflict the Ummah, who is going to help? To help them, get out of it. First, Allah will help them, and He will do so through the scholars of the Ummah, through the scholars and through the people who have taken with change of transmission to the Prophet ﷺ. And they're the ones that will work hard to pull the Ummah out of these phases of heedlessness and forgetfulness and weakness in the Iman. So he says that we're in such a phase now. He's talking about his time. They're in such a phase now that ignorance is prevalent. Ignorance is prevalent. And most people, not only they're not practicing, they don't even know they have to learn. They don't even know they have to learn, and they don't even know that they have to learn and practice. So they think it's enough just to be Muslim, as they say, Muslim by name, so to speak. Like, khalas, you're born Muslim, right? Like you said your shahada, you've entered Islam, and khalas, like that's enough. That's how many people are, right? They don't recognize that they have to. There's a religion that demands their attention, that demands to give time and effort and learning and to practice. They just khalas, like they think it's enough just to be Muslim and that's it. They think it's enough to be Muslim and that's it. So they need someone to come and teach them, no, there's more to this than that. There's more to this than that. You have to learn about your religion. You have to practice it. You have to learn and you have to practice. And who are they? They're the scholars and the callers of Allah Ta'ala and the students of knowledge. Okay? And he mentions a hadith related to times, the end of times, where he says people who practice the religion of God will be seen as strange. The Prophet said in hadith, he said that this religion started out as strange, and those and it will return to being strange. So in the time of the Prophet, people who practiced Islam were deemed, as unusual, so to speak. This is something strange, like this religion compared to what everyone else was doing, who were not Muslim. It was deemed strange, and then it became normalized. And he said that a time will come where people who practice will again be considered strange. Like, it'll become unusual to practice Islam. All right, and he says that likewise, people used to enter Islam and fold, in large groups, in large numbers. And similarly, a time will come, he says, that people will leave Islam in large numbers. So he's talking about a time, when he wrote this book, he's talking about a time that will come close to the end of times. And we might be in that time, we might not be. But the point is that, this phase that we're in, where there is a weakness in the ummah or heedlessness in the ummah, it requires attention. It requires attention. It requires those of us who know to work hard and to play our part in rectifying the trajectory of the ummah. And again, like we mentioned earlier, like he mentioned as well, the author mentioned earlier in the book, that everyone has a part to play in that. Every single person has a part to play in benefiting the ummah and helping them rectify their trajectory and become closer to God. And everyone's part to play is basically based on, their skills and talents, what Allah Ta'ala has blessed them with in terms of ability to contribute. And so no one is really excused from looking around the world and seeing the state the ummah is in and just, sitting at home and doing nothing. Everyone has a part to be at minimum, you can influence those who are around you from, your family, your roommates, your neighbors, your direct community. And at minimum, even with them, you can at least be a good person and lead through example. Let alone going above and beyond, whether it's helping out, teaching, or logistics, or something like that with community service. So he says that the people of this time, there are those who don't know the truth in religion and don't even know they have to go out of their way to learn it. And they're obviously in the worst shape. They don't even know they have to learn about Islam or learn about how to worship Allah Ta'ala properly. And then there's a rung above them, a level above them, those who know that it's obligatory, but they don't learn. They don't bother to learn and practice. They don't bother to learn and practice. And those people, it could be out of laziness, it could be out of heedlessness, it could be because that they're just so caught up in the world, in the rat race and chasing the dunya, that just, it's the last thing on their mind. The point is, they know, they're just negligent for whatever reason. And then there's a rung above that are people who they know and they've been taught and they've learned, but they're not practicing. And then there's a rung above that. There are people who they learn, they've been taught, they practice, but they're not sincere in what they do. So they're doing it for the wrong reasons. They're doing it not for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. They're doing it, for example, maybe to garner or achieve something of the dunya amongst people. And obviously the best of people are those who they know, they practice, and they're sincere in that. So there are those who don't know anything and don't even know you have to learn. Then there are those that know you have to learn, but are negligent and deficient in that because they're lazy or don't care or they're busy chasing the dunya. And there are those who have been taught, they've learned, but they're not practicing. Then amongst those who are practicing, there are those who practice but are not sincere. And then you have some who practice and are sincere, and they're the ones who are saved. They're the ones who have salvation. So all the previous categories he spoke about, from the people who don't know any better and don't even bother to learn, to those who are practicing with that sincerity, all those people are in trouble, he says. All those people are in trouble, and they're basically afflicted in their religion. So they all have some sort of deficiency in their religion, but some of them are worse than others. In their states. The one who obviously doesn't know they have to seek anything, right? They don't know anything about having to go out of their way and they're in the religion. They're in the worst shape. And those who have learned and are acting, but without sincerity, they're I guess you can say the best of the worst. Okay? Go ahead and read.
Some, however, are more astray than others, and some more deceived than others. Excellent is what one of the leaders among the virtuous ancestors, may God have mercy on them, said, "The people are all dead save the learned, and the learned are all dead save those among them who practice what they know. And those are all dead save those among them who are sincere, and those are all dead save those among them who are fearful, and even those are in grave danger."
He says here now, he's mentioning a quote of the scholars. He says that the people, every single person is dead. And again, we spoke briefly about what that means, right? Every single person is dead, meaning that, someone's heart can be dead. They could be alive. Their body's walking, they're talking, they're sitting, they're eating, they're drinking, right? They're talking with you. But their heart might be dead for whatever reason, through negligence of taking care of it, being negligent of taking care of it, by not sustaining it with knowledge and worship of Allah Ta'ala. So everyone's dead, he's saying, except for people who know, the scholars, okay? And again, when he says he's scholars here, everyone's a scholar in what they've learned, so to speak, right? If you've learned something about the religion, you're a scholar in that thing, okay? You've learned that. So he's saying everyone is dead except for people who've been taught and learned, okay? Amongst the learned, all the learned, he said, are dead except for those who act upon that what they learn, okay? So even if you've learned, you're not acting upon it, it's not going to help you. You might as well be considered amongst the dead, he's saying. Okay, you act upon what you know. There are those who've learned and act upon what they know, but they're still considered dead. Who are those? The ones who are not sincere. So anyone who's learned and acts upon what they learned, but they're not sincere, they're still considered dead. Why? Because the actions you're doing are not for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. There's no reward. Okay? So long as there's no reward, there's no benefit in what you're doing, and it is not helping you in any way, shape, or form. Okay? In fact, it'll just be evidence against you that you're basically putting people or dunya, pleasing them before pleasing Allah Ta'ala. So you're khalas, those people are counted from amongst the dead as well. And he says the people who are sincere, some of them are still considered from amongst the dead. Who are those? The ones who are not fearful of God. Okay, the ones who are not fearful of God. So those who learn and act and are sincere are still considered amongst the dead unless they're fearful of God. Okay, unless we recognize, okay, that our actions are subject to being accepted or not. Our actions are being subject to being accepted or not, and that if it wasn't for Allah Ta'ala's mercy, our actions would not be accepted, and we wouldn't be entered into paradise. So he's saying all those people, everyone essentially, all right, everyone essentially is considered amongst the dead unless they've learned, acted upon it, are sincere, and are fearful of God. And he says even those people, they should recognize that they're in danger. Why are they in danger? Because Allah Ta'ala ultimately has dominion over everything. And there's a chance that even us, with our actions and our sincerity and our fear of God, our actions may not be accepted. Okay? Or Allah Ta'ala, something might happen in our life and our states become changed. And we end up somewhere else in a worse state and we die on that. Allah protect us all from that and end up being people of, people who are not of salvation. Good.
You are now aware from what has been said that because of the common people's disinterest in learning about religion and seeking the truth, and their being contented to remain ignorant and blind instead of learned and rightly guided, the responsibility that falls upon those who call to God and teach his religion is multiplied manifold, for it is obligatory upon them to rise to the situation. Strive to guide everyone, take the initiative to disseminate knowledge, spread it everywhere, so that everyone will learn. Then the path of God will become clear for those who could travel it, for those who would travel it, and the argument of God will have become established against those who would perish. Callers to God and scholars must be extremely compassionate and gentle with all Muslims, intent on guiding, teaching, and calling them to that in which lies their salvation and their happiness in this world and the next. They must be patient to the extreme, tolerant, forbearing, comforting, affectionate, and unassuming. God exalted be he said to his messenger, may God's blessings and peace be upon him, lower your wing to the believers, and had you been harsh and coarse of heart, they would have despaired from around you, dispersed from around you. Should the need arise for a certain harshness because no response is forthcoming otherwise, then let it be purely in appearance, not involving the heart, and always stopping short at causing ill feeling and dissension. If ever they are injured.
Okay, so he's saying that people's turning away from the religion of God and being complacent with their ignorance, tamam, that is something that requires even more work from the people who are learned and who are calling to Allah Ta'ala. So as people increase in their ignorance and in their turning away from Allah Ta'ala, it requires an increase in effort from the people who are learned and are calling to Allah Ta'ala. And these people who call to Allah Ta'ala that are learned, they have to have something, they have to have a specific trait in their heart that is extremely important, that is having mercy for all of mankind. So the Prophet ﷺ, he was sent as a prophet to all of humanity. And as Allah Ta'ala said in the Quran, he was sent rahmatan lil alamin. He was sent as a mercy to all of the worlds. As a mercy to all of the worlds. Part of his mercy to the world was how he had compassion for all of humanity. He had compassion for all of humanity. There's a narration where the Prophet ﷺ, there was someone being carried who had died, okay, being carried in front of him to be buried. And the Prophet ﷺ became very emotional. And they looked at him and they said, his companions looked at him and said, "Oh, Prophet of God, it's just, the person who's being carried is not Muslim. Like, you're becoming very emotional over the death of someone who's not Muslim." And he said, this is someone who I wasn't able to help, and they're entered the fire. Another narration, the Prophet ﷺ, after one of the battles he fought with the believers against the people of Quraysh, the people of Mecca, they began to, the Muslims, they didn't do so well in that battle. And some of the Muslims asked the Prophet ﷺ, why don't you just pray against them? Just pray against them, like pray that Allah Ta'ala gives us victory over them, right? And he said, pray that Allah Ta'ala destroys them, and that we're giving complete victory over them. And he said that. And what did the Prophet ﷺ pray for? As soon as they asked him of that, he said, "Oh Allah, forgive my people," meaning Quraysh. Forgive them because they don't know any better. Forgive them for what they've done to us, like for them coming and fighting the believers, fighting your messenger. Forgive them because they don't know any better. Forgive them, meaning what? Part of forgiveness for a disbeliever is that they're guided to Islam. They're guided to Islam and they become forgiven by entering Islam. Another narration of Prophet ﷺ, when he went to Ta'if, a city outside of Mecca, he went there to call people to God, and he was pelted with stones until, the blood was so much it filled his sandals. And this is a really well-known excursion of the Prophet ﷺ, where they sent their children and they sent people, the city sent people to torment him on his way out and pelt him with stones. And afterwards, Allah Ta'ala sent the angel of the mountains to him. And they asked him, if you want, we'll just crush that whole city. Like, khalas, like what they did to you, right? The disrespect they showed to the messenger of God, they can be destroyed. And what did the Prophet say? He said, no, rather he made dua. He said that, no, don't destroy them. And he said, and rather he made dua. He said, Allah, inshallah, from their loins will come people who believe in your message. And so, as we look through the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, incident after incident, event after event, you see very clearly that he was someone who's extremely merciful and compassionate to all of humanity. To all of humanity. There was never any, ill will he had toward anyone, whether they're a Muslim or not. And his intense compassion for humanity, his intense mercy for humanity was something that was absolutely incredible. And so in our calling to Allah Ta'ala, as we call to Allah Ta'ala, as we endeavor to help humanity generally in the Ummah specifically, we have to have that trait as well. And having that trait is a way of imitating the Prophet ﷺ and following his example. Just like how, for example, we're so earnest as a people to make sure we follow the Prophet ﷺ in how we dress, how we speak, right? How we eat, what we eat, right? We have to be earnest as well in the traits we have in our heart for the greater community and all of humanity. And the most important of those traits is to have a sense of mercy and compassion for people, to genuinely want good for them. And to genuinely want good for them is to essentially want them to become closer to God. And that starts with becoming Muslim if they're not Muslim, and it extends to, helping them out of their heedlessness if they're Muslim but aren't practicing. So he says it's important for callers to Allah Ta'ala to have this love and compassion and mercy for people, for the Muslims and those who are not Muslims, they're calling to God. And they should be very earnest and yearn to help them and guide them to that which is better for them, okay? Which is their salvation in the next world and their well-being in this one. And because of that, that mercy they have for them, you have to be patient as well. Just like how, for example, like a parent, because of how much they love their child, or how much someone might love their brother or someone else they hold in high regard, because of how much they love them, they'll put up with a lot. A parent, because of how much they love their child, like they'll, when they're a baby, they're up all night with the baby, soothing them if they're crying, feeding them, changing them, As the child grows older, they put up with a lot. The child might, act out or, disobey them. But, khalas, like the parent still continues to help the child and raise them and is there for them. Similarly, for example, someone with their brothers are the same. Someone that, they love their brother or they, want good for them. They'll put up with some things that might annoy them or might, be difficult to bear. So having forbearance and patience is part of its compassion and mercy for the ummah and for humanity generally, and to bear what they bring to you in terms of turmoil and in terms of problems and in terms of just bothering as well. The Prophet ﷺ was someone who exemplified this in the most beautiful of way. His people kicked him out of Mecca. They kicked him out of Mecca. They took his wealth. They bothered him. Right? They tortured him and his companions. But at the end of the day, what did he do? Right? He made dua for them. He never made dua against them. No matter what they ever did to him, the first words that he always used to say was, Allah guide them, Allah forgive them, Allah bring them to Islam. If not them, then their children. He always had their best interest in mind, no matter how much, how bad they were to them. And if, for example, calling those people to Allah Ta'ala requires some sort of, harshness. So, we looked at the example of the Prophet ﷺ in the battle against Quraysh, right? There was harshness required there. They came with military force to destroy the believers. And what did the believers do? What did the Prophet ﷺ do? He met them. He defended himself. That's a form of harshness. He defended himself, right? But that harshness was just outward. It wasn't something he let enter his heart. So in his heart, he still wanted good for them. He wanted them to become Muslim. He wanted Allah Ta'ala to forgive them for their sins and their transgressions. If they were to become Muslim, right there on the battlefield, he would drop his weapons and walk away and embrace them as his brothers in Islam. Okay? So the harshness people might meet people who are, the harshness we might need to meet people who are ignorant or people who are, not practicing or not Muslim, that harshness, whether it's in speech or action or something like that, all of that is just something that, it's on your outward limbs, but you don't let it get into your heart. In our hearts, we still want people the best for people, which is that Allah Ta'ala guides them to Him, forgives them, and lets them enter paradise. Okay, and any harshness we have to show, okay, it's just something we do outwardly to help achieve a goal. Just like how, for example, a parent, right? A parent might tell their child off. The kid did something wrong, and the parent might, get upset with them, maybe raise their voice or punish them. Okay, but in the parent's heart, during this entire sequence of events, right? What do they want? They want the best for the kid, right? They still love them, and they know they're only doing this because they know that this is what the child needs in order to learn a lesson and to become closer, and to become a better individual, a better person. So it's important. It's important that in our journey of helping the ummah, that we maintain in our heart a love for humanity. And if something happens where we have to respond in a way that could be interpreted as harsh or heavy, it's done in a way where it doesn't affect our spiritual state with Allah Ta'ala and our state with them by diminishing our mercy for them or our love for them or our desire of good for those people. Continue reading. Good.
If ever they are injured in any way by the ignorant because of their calling them to God, they must be forbearing, ignore the injury, and utter only words of goodness. God exalted be He said to His prophet, may God's blessings and peace be upon him, accept what they do, enjoin praiseworthy things, and turn away from the ignorant. And the servants of the All-Merciful who walk gently upon the earth, and when addressed by the ignorant, say peace. Prophets, messengers, and those leaders of truth and guidance who follow them have all been made to suffer greatly by various kinds of ignorant and heedless people. But they were ever patient and preferred God's reward. It only increased them in their wish to guide them to the path of God, exalted be He. Conceal them religiously and exert and encourage them to conform to God's orders and prohibitions. This was the pattern of God's prophets and messengers with their communities. Those who called to God among previous communities and those who call to God among this Muhammadan community. The caller to God and His religion may sometimes not be met with outright rejection and harm, but rather with disinterest and heedlessness. Or he may be listened to and accepted, with no sign of this appearing on the behavior of the people in the way of upholding the truth and implementing it. Nevertheless, he has no excuse in leaving the calling to God and His path, even if over an extended period of time, those who respond are very few.
So he's saying that it is from the experience of calling to Allah Ta'ala that naturally one will experience, harshness or, resistance from individuals that they're calling to Allah Ta'ala. Okay? So just like other prophets, for example, they were met with resistance, people were bad to them, people bothered them, people might have even, might have persecuted them, right? They experienced this resistance from people that were calling to God, and this required from them to be patient. They bore this, and Allah rewarded them for that. They bore this resistance from people and this persecution. Allah rewarded them for that. And eventually, the fruits of their labor were seen. Maybe not in the immediate generation, but in the generations after that. So it's from the experience of calling to Allah Ta'ala and spreading His message that people might experience, experience things from people that are difficult to bear. Whether it's someone, speaking out to them, calling them names or saying something about them, or, giving them a hard time, right? Whatever it might be, right? These are tests and tribulations from Allah Ta'ala that He gave to everyone who called to Allah Ta'ala, the prophets and those who resemble them in this carrying of the message. The Prophet said that in Hadith. He said that the messengers of God and the prophets are the ones who are tested the most. And then subsequently, the people who are most like them are tested the most after them. And so people who resemble the Prophet ﷺ in this way as well, in their mission of calling to Allah Ta'ala, are tested. And this test will come from people, maybe being bad to them or bothering them. And so it's really important that the caller of Allah Ta'ala bears all of that with patience and doesn't let it affect his spiritual state, in terms of having mercy and having compassion for humanity and compassion for those who are bad to him. And it's like our shaykh always told us. They said that the path of calling to Allah Ta'ala, the way of calling to Allah Ta'ala, is a road that's covered in thorns, meaning that there's going to be times you're walking this path and you'll be pricked, right? But know that it's going somewhere important and great. And if you're persistent, okay, you will achieve success. Either people will listen to you and eventually turn to Allah Ta'ala, or at minimum, you're rewarded and you'll see the fruits of your labor in the next life. And you'll see the fruits of your labor in the next life. And so this is the path of the prophets, okay? This is the way the prophets are. They bear what people throw at them in terms of persecution, in terms of, bad speech, in terms of torment. They bear it all for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, and they still continue to want good for the ummah, just like what we saw in the narration of the Prophet that we mentioned, the events that transpired in his life. And then sometimes he says people will continue to call to Allah Ta'ala. They'll call to Allah Ta'ala, tamam, and then they see that no one's responding. Okay? Sometimes people don't respond to being called to Allah Ta'ala. Either they don't respond because, they're being negative towards the caller, or maybe they're just not even being negative. They're just heedless. They don't care. Point is, they're not responding positively and doing that which is in their best interest, which is to worship Allah Ta'ala properly. In this case, right, if the person who's calling to Allah Ta'ala is experiencing this, whether it's people not responding, whether it's people being bad to him, none of that is a reason or an excuse for him to neglect calling to Allah Ta'ala. Someone starts calling to Allah Ta'ala and they experience pushback from whoever they're calling, right? However that may be, whether it's negative and harsh or whether it's just, pushback like, human nature, just lazy or just, not really responding properly. None of that is an excuse for him to stop doing what he's doing. And none of that removes the burden of calling to Allah Ta'ala from him. So he still has to continue. And the example of this persistence in calling to Allah Ta'ala is prevalent in the lives of the Prophet. So it said Nuh alayhi salam called to Allah Ta'ala for 950 years. He called to Allah Ta'ala for 950 years. And the people who believed in him after 950 years were so few, like they filled a boat with him. Imagine you go to work for 950 years and you've managed to only convince enough people to follow Allah Ta'ala, and the amount of those people you can fill a boat with, like a small boat. And that's a lot of work, right? For a small amount of fruit outwardly. We might look at that and be like, wow, like 950 years, that's so much time. All you got is that, like, khalas, like, might be a waste of years. Someone might look at that and be like, that's a big waste of years and time. Maybe you should have done something else. But the reality is that it wasn't a big waste of time, wasn't it? Because number one, the reward he achieved through doing that is immense. So Nuh alayhi salam is considered what we call like ulul azm, one of the greatest category of prophets because of what he bore from his community, the tribulation he bore, the tests he bore in calling them to Allah Ta'ala. Because of that, his rank is extremely elevated. So the reward is always there for what someone puts into the da'wah, number one. Number two, right? The numbers of people that he guided were few. But those people are who? Right? Because Allah Ta'ala brought floods to the earth and flooded, he flooded he flooded the earth during Sayyidina Nuh's time. The only people who were saved from that flood were the people on that boat. So those few that were guided by Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam eventually became who? They became the forefathers of humanity. And everyone in humanity now that we're looking at, we're the progeny of those people on that boat. So in a way, the numbers of the people he saved or he helped were few, but they had a massive impact because they became the future forefathers of humanity. And so just like that, it's an example for us to remember anytime the going gets tough. Going might get tough, but ultimately, most things in life that are worth doing, are going to be tough, And the toughness that when the experiences and calling to Allah Ta'ala is just a sign of the great reward potentially waiting for them. So we'll stop there and we'll finish the chapter of the book tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala. We close with the fact that Allah Ta'ala gives us tawfiq to seek beneficial knowledge, that we act upon it, He gives us tawfiq to act upon it, and He accepts that from us, and gives us tawfiq to spread it all over the world. And He makes the Prophet happy with us and rewards our teachers, our shuyukh, and those who write upon us with the Hadrat al-Nabi.